It was a resounding emblem of perseverance and idealism. The example he set about what can be achieved through peaceful protest has inspired a great number of people from different cultures, different parts of the world, and at different times in history. From Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela to the so-called Tank Man in Tiananmen Square as a mentor, teacher, and spiritual leader of his people. He guided him to the achievement of a goal that he committed to in his youth and embraced with passionate speeches and concrete actions. The result? A year before his death, India's independence ceased to be a dream and became a reality. However, that would not mean the definitive union that the man had dreamed of for his country. His idea of merging Muslims and Hindus not only would not happen, but it would have consequences for his own person. In this report, we are going to delve into the history of this character as loved as he is hated. We will delve into the maxims of his life, his activism, his manifestos, and the current state of his legacy more than 150 years after his birth. Our journey will end on January 30th, 1948, the day Mahatma Gandhi died. It was 17 hours on a mild winter day. Mahatma Gandhi was walking leisurely on a majestic lawn in New Delhi, leaning on the shoulders of two young women. He walked to a nearby square where 500 people were waiting for him to perform a community prayer. At that moment, a man approached him with his hands together in a sign of adoration. "Namaste," he exclaimed in a soft whisper. That kind of encounters happened to him constantly. At his 78 years old, he had already become a standard bearer for just causes and the discovery of inner balance. Equally true, however, is that by that age he also had a long list of enemies who considered him a thorn in their side. The man who had approached this leader in a sign of peace quickly stood up, pulled out a weapon, and shot him 3 times. 3 bullets that pierced his chest and quickly stained his white garments with blood. His last words were Garam, something like, "Oh my God." Mahatma Gandhi fell with the palms of his hands pressed together, as if refusing to interrupt his last prayer. That January, Gandhi had already suffered 2 attacks, and many pointed out that there were countless times when they tried to get rid of this person, but all attempts were unsuccessful until this last one. That afternoon, those who wanted him out of the game finally celebrated. The murderer never stopped showing pride. "Your name?" "Turam Godse." "We will return to him later." The ground where Gandhi collapsed and the elegant mansion where he spent his last days has become a memorial to his life and his violent death. There is no security check or ticket booth to enter the Gandhi Esriti. You can walk in from the street without restrictions and for free, just the way Gandhi would have wanted it. The heartbreaking announcement was not long in coming. The people were informed that the Great Father had died. The tragic news turned into thousands of cries that joined together during the night. The streets were flooded with prayers, laments, and tributes. The ashes of the deceased were consecrated and religiously immersed in numerous sacred rivers of the immense country. An era was coming to an end. But how had Gandhi become a saint of the modern era? Gandhi was born in 1869 in Porbandar, India. His father was a high-ranking state official and his mother maintained a passionate and operative religious faith that traced back to the ancient and sacred Brahmanic and Hindu traditions. The influence of both made a mark on the young man who developed a methodical personality in which dilemmas and concerns of various kinds coexisted. Following traditions of that time, Gandhi was forced by his family to marry at the age of 13 to Kasturba Makanji, a 14-year-old girl who could neither read nor write. Against all odds, it is assumed that he fell in love with her as if she was some kind of soulmate. Other biographers clarify that the young man found in sex the only way to survive that arrangement in which he had no say. Not without controversy, later as an adult, Gandhi would criticize his parents' decision to have married him to a woman they had not cultivated enough. While in that time of youth Gandhi was still close to carnal pleasures, there was a break in his perceptions when in 1885 he starred in a painful episode. Gandhi's father was on his deathbed, and it was Gandhi who was in charge of taking care of him. However, at a certain point, the young man abandoned his guard post to have a romantic encounter with Kasturba. When he returned to where his father was, he had died. A 16-year-old Gandhi never forgave himself for neglecting his father to satisfy his carnal and, according to him, selfish needs. Gandhi would have 4 children but would later develop a rather peculiar view on sex. In fact, he would ultimately embrace celibacy. After having followed a regular course of learning in his homeland when he was about 20 years old, Gandhi traveled to London to perfect his legal studies. That trip was decisive in his life, as it provided him with a remarkable approach to Western culture. And what did that encounter mean to him? It meant the rethinking of many concepts. However, there was still time before his figure was established. First, we have to talk about his stay in South Africa, which in hindsight was the place where the seed of what would become this revolutionary man, who led the most outstanding protests of his generation, was sown. Upon returning from London, Gandhi tried to establish himself as a lawyer in Bombay without success, so he ended up having a minor role preparing petitions for litigants. Everything would change when in 1893 he accepted a 1-year work contract with an Indian company operating in South Africa. Once there, he quickly became interested in the situation of the 150,000 compatriots who lived there, who were discriminated against in the vast majority of cases. Gandhi then set out to carry out the difficult mission of morally and socially redeeming those who had no representation. He experienced racism firsthand and decided to question what was taken for granted. Numerous and varied were his humanitarian initiatives. He established agricultural colonies and hospitals, and above all, tried to eliminate the castes and religions that divided his people. In his relations and his inevitable clashes with the authorities of South Africa, he inaugurated a method of struggle that would maintain respect for the human person and avoid armed revolt. In 1906, he emphasized the value of what he called the force of truth as a foundation. In 1894, Gandhi founded the Indian Congress Party in Natal to unite the Indian community in South Africa into a homogeneous political force, and although he could not prevent some discriminatory laws from being sanctioned, he did manage to get more and more eyes to turn and witness the unfavorable conditions in which many lived. The press from around the world was able to record how the civil rights of Indians were suppressed in certain communities. His followers and Gandhi himself were repressed and imprisoned many times, but that did not stop them. They made great strides, and above all, they managed to stop impunity from being so freely articulated. They had turned passive civil disobedience into the best combat weapon. In 1914, Gandhi returned to India, where he led a secluded life until 1918, when the First World War ended. From that year on, Gandhi was practically the leader of the nationalist movement after openly promulgating economic autonomy, which he believed could be achieved through non-cooperation. His energies were then devoted to abolishing colonial oppression. Although non-violence is a common concept in Hinduism and Eastern culture, Gandhi claimed it as a universal ethical imperative underlying all religions. His thinking also connected with eminent representatives of spirituality in the West and with theorists of politics and economics. He then became the foremost figure not only within the Congress but throughout India. This year dates back to the title of Mahatma, which the people themselves conferred on him in a spontaneous burst of enthusiasm and devotion. Gandhi would go down in history with this nickname, which literally means the magnanimous, and refers to his qualities as a prophet and saint that the masses recognized in him. But let's analyze why his influence surpassed his figure and that of his country. Gandhi's socio-political theory is based on 4 fundamental concepts: self-government, non-violent action, self-sufficiency, and moral society. Self-government was the term used by the Indian anti-colonial movement to refer to the demand for India's independence from the British Empire. For Gandhi, a truly free India not only involved ending colonial occupation, but also required the construction of a society made up of citizens civically committed to collective well-being through moral rectitude. Gandhi argued that modern Western civilizations are built on the values of materialism and competition, which ultimately breed violence, whether against other nations, their own citizens, or the environment. Non-violent struggle, as we have already explained, is the human disposition that allows peaceful sociability through the moral imposition of limits on our personal ambitions. Lastly, self-sufficiency promotes cooperation as the foundation of economic and political systems. As can be seen, Gandhi's legacy is not only important for articulating an alternative vision to the dominant conception of society. His political activism was always aimed at fulfilling in practice the social values he preached. One of his most famous phrases was, "My life is my message." His clothing was not a matter of style, for example. He wove it himself and encouraged others to weave their own clothes. In turn, his repeated and painful fasts were proof of a complete commitment to his cause and showed a deep contempt for the principle that the end justifies the means. From 1930, Gandhi intensified his involvement in politics. He wanted deeper and deeper changes, and indeed, everything around him was about to change. In 1930, Gandhi made a courageous stand against the salt monopoly laws, leading a memorable 3-week march, bold and symbolic at the same time. At the end of 1931, he participated in London from the Second Roundtable Conference for the establishment in the country of a constitutional government, but the conference marked a failure for the Indian cause. Back in his homeland, Gandhi continued with his passionate attention to social problems. At the outbreak of World War II, Gandhi initially suggested a policy of indifference, but the unilateral inclusion of India in the war, without consulting the people's representatives, changed his mind. Gandhi declared that India could not be a party to a war that was theoretically for democratic freedom, while that same freedom was denied to India. At that time, his detractors argued that not supporting Great Britain in its fight against Nazism was immoral. They were bloody years. Thousands of Gandhi's followers were ruthlessly suppressed and shot by the police until Gandhi himself was arrested on August 9, 1942. He spent 2 years behind bars, and during that time his wife passed away. He did not receive the appropriate medical attention as his beliefs did not allow him to. Sometime later, Gandhi fell ill with malaria, and ignoring the beliefs that did not allow him to let his wife receive care and healing through medicine, he did accept to be healed with medications. Gandhi was finally released because his health worsened, and his captors assumed that if he died in prison it could have a high political cost. With the end of the war, the British Empire gave clear indications that power would be transferred to Indian hands. Gandhi then ordered to suspend the fight. His goal after so much sacrifice was finally being realized. But was peace finally coming to India? Well, the answer unfortunately is no. After the British acceded to the demands for independence, India suffered a partition in 1947 from which two now hostile countries emerged. India with a Hindu majority and Pakistan with a Muslim majority. Hindus and Muslims saw each other as potential enemies, and it was impossible for the groups to accept coexistence. The inability to see a unified India made Gandhi not celebrate the change of government and set a new goal. To be able to make Hindus and Muslims preach tolerance for each other, a goal that would lead him to death. Desperate to see his vision of peace thwarted, Gandhi walked barefoot through the villages where violence had erupted, trying to calm the waters. However, those who opposed his visions increased their hatred towards him. Some considered him a meddler, others a traitor for having accepted independence on those terms. It is then that the aforementioned assassin, Turam Godse, enters the story, who ended up being tried along with 7 men, theoretically accomplices. On November 15, 1949, he was hanged, despite the pleas of Gandhi's children who asked for his forgiveness. It was always suspected that the real instigator of the murder had been the president of the Mahasabha party, who accused Gandhi of having consented to the secession of Pakistan and of weakening the Indian government with his continuous concessions to the Muslims. Gandhi's body was wrapped in a shroud and covered with rose petals, and although more than 1 million people accompanied the body to the funeral pyre, many began at that moment to question the recently fallen opening debates that still hold. Most of these controversies are linked to the vows of chastity that Gandhi made at the beginning of the 20th century. It is supposed that the man asked to test his resistance by asking some of his followers to stimulate him. The idea of this was that he could resist temptation. The pacifist's invitation for his followers to join him in his bed was not well received when it came to light. And on the other hand, a heated debate was opened relatively recently. Was Gandhi perhaps a racist? At a university in Ghana, a statue of Gandhi was removed after students and professors complained that the man showed contempt for black people during his stay in South Africa. Gandhi scholars do not refute this, although they argue that Gandhi reformed his views later on. Hindu supremacists are still furious with him for having expressed great compassion for the country's Muslim minority and for having allowed Pakistan to separate from India. Some Hindu nationalists have even erected statues to Gandhi's assassin. Gandhi is also unpopular among the outcasts, a class of Indians who were at the bottom stratum of the country's Hindu society for centuries, but who now, with an estimated population of over 200 million people, wield significant political influence. His connection with India's elite is one of the reasons why the outcasts and people on the political left judge him harshly and blame him for not doing enough to dismantle a caste system that is often brutal in India. Although Gandhi did defend the so-called lower castes, his critics argue that he did not challenge the system strongly enough while not refraining from maintaining diplomatic relations with dictators and murderers. After Gandhi's death, January 30th was established as International Peace Day. While his ideas continue to be analyzed, the inspiration and renewal that the man brought to the movements fighting for civil rights is undeniable. His way of acting, his views on veganism, his behavior in the face of hatred, and his appreciation of the environment made him a figure that marked a before and after. The contemporary world, still plagued by all the evils that Gandhi knew how to denounce, has the obligation to review its priority agenda. It is in this context where, despite the criticisms that can be attributed to him, the man's thoughts remain a practical theoretical horizon for building a truly free society. A society where violence, once and for all, ceases to be the main protagonist. That concludes today's video on Mahatma Gandhi's life and death. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your comments and suggestions for future videos below. I'll conclude with a few marathon recommendations. With that, I bid you farewell. I'm Magnus Mephisto, and this was El Diac.